Amsterdam, and good afternoon, Busan, Korea. And also my greetings to ladies and gentlemen, and my dear colleagues, and all the audiences at YouTube Online. Well, before beginning the conference, with all the participants of today, I would like to express my deepest condolences to all those affected by the Itaewon tragedy in Seoul a few days ago. As Korea is now under a national mourning period, I ask you to pay silent tribute for a minute. Thank you. I am Giwoong Jung, the Vice Head of Hk+ National Strategies Research Project Agency for the National Research Foundation of Korea at the Center for International Area Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. It is my honor to take the role of chairman in this meaningful international conference. When it comes to Mr. Rao, I cannot see you, but I'm sure that you are watching us. And this conference is co-hosted by the Korea Environment Institute Center for Environmental Information of North Korea, and Hk+ Research Project Agency, and the Institute for International Relations of Busan University of Foreign Studies. We co-hosted international conferences on December 1st of 2020 and November 12th of 2021, and the title of the 2020 conference was Seeking Supranational Cooperation for the Sustainable Development of the Korean Peninsula, and the title of last year's conference was Border and Environment, Supranational Cooperation and Communication for Reaching Carbon Neutrality, which is the same as this year's title. Some of today's participants joined that conference too. Glad to see all of you again. And I would like to express my special thanks to Mr. Ahu, as it is 6 o'clock in the morning in Amsterdam, Netherlands. It is not easy to wake up early in the morning and join the conference, but Mr. Ahu gladly accepted our offer, and he is with us now. Thank you again. And this year's title is Border and Environment, Supranational Cooperation and Communication for Reaching Carbon Neutrality 2022. We have 4 presenters and 5 discussants from 5 different countries today, and let me briefly introduce them one by one. If you want to know them more precisely, you can find their resume in the profile book, which was distributed at the reception when you registered. And the first presenter is Mr. Director Daisuke Harada from Japan Oil, Gas and Metal National Corporation. The title of his article is What is Happening in Japan in the Global Decarbonization Trend Before and After COP26 and Before and After Ukraine Crisis. Mr. Harada? No, not yet. Yeah, just to say hello. Yeah, okay. The second present is Dr. Kaho Yu from Verisk, Maplecroft. The title of Dr. Yu's article is a trilemma for China: energy security, environmental sustainability, and economic development. Hello, Mr. Dr. Yu. The third presenter is Ms. Senior Research Analyst Zlata Segreva from King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center of Saudi Arabia. The article's title is Global Crossroads Between the Environmental Targets and the Energy Security, Possible Pathways for Russia. Good afternoon, Mr. Lata. I would like to express my special thanks to these 3 participants as they come to Korea against all odds in this very difficult situation caused by COVID-19 pandemic. The last presenter is Mr. Erik Rahu from Netherlands. As an energy market expert, consultant, and co-author of Touching Hydrogen Future, he will present under the title How to Contribute to Energy and Environmental Security and Transition Globally and in Europe. We have such various topics today, and I'm sure that it will give us a chance to think of the carbon neutrality and future cooperation of the global society for reaching it. We have 4 discussants. First of all, Shim Chang-seop from Korea Environment Institute, and Lee Kwang-tae from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, and Kim Do-hoon from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, and Sung Jin-seok from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, and Lee Joo-sung from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, all of staff member of our agency. Owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, we did not invite many audiences today, but it will not dampen the ideas and insights of my dear colleagues. Regarding the presentation order, Mr. Harada would be the first, and Dr. Yu, and Mrs. Segreva, and Mr. Rahu, one by one. I will give 20 minutes to each presenter for the presentation, and the discussants can have 10 minutes. We don't have designated discussants today, so you can freely express your opinion. And please be sure to keep time. I'll give you a lot when you have just 5 minutes to go. Okay, and after all the presentation have been made, the discussants can take their part, and after that, I will give 5 minutes to each presenter to answer the questions and comments of the discussants, and then I will wrap up the session. So this is how we operate the session today, and let Mr. Harada be the first presenter. Thank you.
Thank you for your introduction. My name is Daisuke Harada. It is a very great honor to be here and present here. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, my presentation about Japan. So could you open my slide, please? My slide shows about what's going on in Japan, global trend, and about COP26 before and after, and the Ukraine crisis before and after. But mainly, I'd like to explain what's going on in the world too, because there's main challenges for this decarbonization and carbon neutrality. And these challenges we can share together, and we can solve or not. That's the question until the 2050, 2060, 2070. First of all, let me start with a little bit boring slide, because those people who doesn't know about JOGMEC. JOGMEC is owned by the government. It's an agency. It's similar with a KNOC-like organization in Korea. But our history, you can see the left-hand side and down. It started when I entered 1997. JOGMEC's function is just only oil and gas and stockpiling. Now it's increasing its facility, and this year we're going to expand to hydrogen, ammonia, CCUS. So as you can see here, our organization was in a trend to change. We have to change ourselves, not only hydrocarbon, but also new energy and renewables. Our budget is very huge, actually $20 billion a year, but this is spent to actually upstream business, or mainly for the stockpiling. Let us start with this slide. This is, you can see your countries here. Every country make adjustment. And peak was a COP26 last year, October and November. And after that, yesterday's session also shows that Oman was actually last month. They have an adjustment with the announcement of the decarbonization until 2050, 2060. But the question is, after that, this COP26, actually boom is over. Now we are heading for the decarbonization until 2050, 2070, 2060. But the question is here, you can see right-hand side, 80%, around 80% is agreed for the carbon neutrality until 2050 to 2070. But last 20% is not agreed yet. What's going on? Is okay or not? Majority is okay, carbon neutrality, but the question is the population of the world. 2050, our population will expand to 7 billion people to possibly 10 billion people. At that time, those 20% region will be the main driver of the population. The reason why, actually, fully consensus is required for carbon neutrality, because those people in the world is a poverty, and they want to use hydrocarbon more than now, and they will expand the population. So 80% agreed at this moment is not a solution. We have to make a fully consensus for all over the world. But this is really difficult, because hydrogen is expensive. I'm going to later explain. And there's main challenges here. In Japan, we're in the boom with the hydrogen and this new carbon neutrality. You can see in this slide, we are now generating the strategy towards long-term, 30 years. But unfortunately, we have only by 2030. But we are heading for 2050. We don't know sure, unclear, but we are clear target for 2030. And you can see here, it's not enough. We cannot achieve. This is a backcast method. So by 2050, we need to change our energy mix like this. This is possible or not. So we're now huge discussion going on in Japan as well as other world. Next 3 slides shows a little bit boring for me because it's now what we're going to do. But it's like a theory. It's not like a practical like activity. But you can just like take a look, very small, like you can just schedules, but you can find out. Just for one point, I want to point out, this concrete schedule is only definite just only by 2030. After that 20 years, we have to do our homework of each field, and it's not determined yet. It's just like under discussion. So we are heading for the carbon neutrality, but still there's many uncertainties. As you can see here, many pictures, beautiful. Hydrogen, maybe it's a promising energy. I don't believe so, unfortunately, because point is economy. These goods, these tools, very attractive to show. It's beautiful, isn't it? But the cost itself, how much? Hydrogen ship, how much? Mirai is beautiful, I want to buy. But how much is this? But how much is cost itself is okay. But the fuel, as compared with oil and gas, it's competitive or not. People can afford the price itself. Government have to pay huge subsidies. The point is I want to show is, Japan, we have technology here. If we can be the seller of these goods, we are the winner of this game of carbon neutrality. But if we are the buyer, that we are the loser, because we're going to lose money. And Japan is not winner because we have to buy fuel outside. Inside Japan, there's no fuels. And hydrogen itself also is a secondary energy. So we have to generate from natural gas or any other like electricity from renewables, but it's also expensive still. This is a hydrogen scheme. Everybody knows about this. Hydrogen is a very difficult material. Why not? Why last 70 years we use oil and gas? It's cheap. Why we don't use hydrogen? It's expensive and it's very difficult to transport especially. So we see liquefied hydrogen is impossible. Not impossible, maybe possible, but to some extent it's very difficult. And maybe ammonia for the hydrogen carrier or methanation, it could be the solution. But still, this is expensive and this is low calorie. This is a very important point. Hydrogen is a low calorie, not enough as compared with oil and gas because with a C, with a carbon, it's burned, but the energy itself is coming out from hydrogen is less. This is actually, discussion is less all over the world. Hydrogen cannot be the promising source of the energy as compared with other sources at present. Let's go back to why this boom starts of the global decarbonization. Yesterday's session also shows about the EU 2019, December. Von der Leyen came to the head of the EU, but we have to remember at that time EU also did not have a consensus at this moment. But after the COVID-19 pandemic started in February in Milan, in Italy, and April, May, they decided to use this COVID-19 to accelerate the economy of the EU. Because of lockdown, they have to find a substitute of the economy of this activity. Then with the COVID-19, this movement is like could not happen, my understanding. What do you think? I want to listen to everyone. With the COVID-19, it's a trigger of the decarbonization. Of course, before there's a Paris Agreement, you can say, but Paris Agreement is a little bit unstable, but this COVID-19 could be a trigger. What I want to say is that then now, we wear masks in Korea, in Japan, but in London, in the United States, there's no mask at all. Now COVID-19 could be some kind of flu. Then why EU have to put this huge amount of 2 trillion euro until 2027? So this is a question. When COVID-19 is over, this budget for digitalization and hydrogen could be changed. This is all we have to care about this game, like an unstable factor. As you can see here, this is the EU. Also, actually, carbon neutral means what is that? Carbon neutral is not like exclude all the hydrocarbons. Actually, there's a basement scenario. There's 8 scenarios in EU. But the baseline scenario is also shows about in 2050, they are dependent on more than 50% of the hydrocarbons, fossil fuels. So this is neutrality. You have to use this because to procure all the energy what EU need, actually fossil fuels is necessary in 2050. But actually you have to absorb all the CO2 somehow. The reason why this we have to mind, then the investment at this moment upstream, EU like a finance institution now prohibit to invest to the upstream business, especially hydrocarbons. Now we are facing lack of resources is very soon within 10 years. Because of lack of investment, that means a lack of production in the 10 years. So that means a higher price of oil and gas. Even now, this is today, is very high, but actually this moment is also, we have to be careful. We need investment until 2050 even though. IEA, okay, I'm going to skip this because to save time. But IEA also put this net zero scenario last year, you remember, in May. But this is also backcast scenario. IEA's real intention is to show you are heading for the very, very difficult purpose, carbon neutral by 2050. Then if you want to do this, you need to do this right now. You have to stop all the investment to oil and gas, and you have to spend lot of money for the renewable energies. But world doesn't move like that way. So this is IEA's caution. It's like to show your way is so much difficulties, and you have to do from today, but actually world doesn't change so easily enough. As for the hydrogen seems like listen to a very beautiful energy source, but I'm going to explain what's going on. Last 30 years, hydrogen, actually, you can see the left-hand side chart, expanding its production. But this size is just only 4 million barrel of the oil, like oil equivalent, 4 billion barrel. But right-hand side, you can down, we use oil, 98 million barrels. Then we have to expand this. If you want to substitute totally from oil to hydrogen, is this possible or not? This is also one of the questions. EU also occupies 15%. They have to expand how to generate hydrogen all over how to import hydrogen all over the world. And Russia was the key for EU, but now things change after Ukraine crisis. One of the points we have to take care is, actually this is also very important, but ignoring discussion, tax. You means it's Korea and Japan, we pay a lot of tax for oil and gas. If you have cars, now is a very difficult moment because gasoline is so high. But mostly in EU and Japan, you can see right-hand side, top is Japanese taxation for oil and gas. Especially oil gasoline is at 50% is a tax. And in Korea, I think it's the same. And EU is also the same, more about 50 to 60%. Why? They have to maintain the road. They have to maintain the facility, to importing facility. Then, left-hand side, you can see IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, just shows. And Jinsuk also pointed out yesterday's session, hydrogen can be cheaper in the future. Of course, it can be cheaper because of the lot of money to be invested. But the question is, this cheaper doesn't contain tax. So you need to put tax, but how to maintain the road? Where does it come from? So each country has these challenges to reduce the oil tax revenue, but how to procure other tax. So can be cheaper, but at least if you buy the hydrogen, you have to pay a VAT. You have to pay some kind of tax. But now there was discussion going on about this matter. We have to remember this is also very important. Hydrogen cannot be promising if there is no structure of the tax, structure of the government to promote, to utilize hydrogen. I want to show you this is a major companies like a stance for the decarbonization, but this is not the center of the topic. I want to show the downside, next slide. How to reduce CO2 emissions. Yeah, so almost like 15 minutes, okay? 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes, okay, I can finish. Yeah, so this is a formula, CO2 net emission can be reduced just only 4 methods. You can see GDP, you can see energy over GDP, CO2 emission over energy, and CO2 emission over CO2 absorption. So what does that mean? Actually, there's a method. You can see the GDP. This is the most important part to reduce the CO2 emission. This is actually economy, scale down. We have to change our lifestyle. We are spending a lot of hydrocarbons now. If we change to hydrogen, but still we have to use, as I showed in EU. So that means that we have to shrink. For example, some analysts said 2 times a week of the shower, and to cook the cooking like gas just only once in a day. Such kind of like change is necessary, but this is not discussed yet. Just like because each country have to promote their economy itself. Second one is energy over GDP. It's an energy saving. Japan is very good at it, but we are doing the best, and very difficult to find space. And third one is the CO2 emission over energy. Is the EU doing? Find a substitute with renewables and other energies. Last one is the United States and Russia is doing is absorbed CO2, CCUS, and forestation. But the point is, I want to say, this is a 4 method, but most important part is the economy. But keep the economy, we cannot touch upon even COP26, 27. We have to keep developing our economy. How to realize both sides? It's quite difficult, as you can see. This slide also want to show is calorie of the hydrogen. Center of the down, you can see the calorie comparison of the natural gas. Actually, hydrogen itself is 3 times less than natural gas. That means you can burn with a CO2, but the coming out energy output is 30%. So how to inexpensive, more than natural gas. This is a huge challenges. And top middle also shows that the hydrogen comes from 2050. It's the IEA statistics shows as coming from natural gas and coal. So we have to reduce CO2 if you want to use the hydrogen too. This is also another challenges. My time is now 3 minutes left, but I want to show about what happened in the Ukraine crisis and after. Relation together with Russia and Japan, as so far was good before the invasion, because we are the pro-cons is a quite good match. Russia want like a market, except like but China. Japan also want to diversify our energy sources. The reason why this is a kind of relation you can see in this slide. And Russia want to sell the hydrogen. This is the Middle East countries also can say, because hydrogen is a new business chance for them. They are selling oil, gas, but this is a raw material. Now there are new commodity coming up. Very expensive, but some people like Japan, Korea can buy. So hydrogen is, Russia is like a strategy here is coming up. And Russia itself has a huge forestation potential too. World's largest taiga in the East Siberia and Siberian region. So they are starting evaluate before the crisis. And one more thing I want to point out this last slide, CCUS is also inevitable for achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. But now Ukraine crisis happens. But we have to see how long this crisis will end, how long it will last. Because Russia is a part of a very important country. Of course, Ukraine is also an important country, but they have huge resources. Actually 3 world largest resources. First one is natural gas, second one is CCUS, third one is forest. And these 3 factors actually the most important factor for achieving decarbonization and carbon neutrality. We are now stay away from Russia. We should do this. But we should see the long term. When Ukraine crisis is over, we hope, really we wish, at that time, we have to reconstruct the relation together with Russia. But this discussion is not popular in Japan, just it's my opinion. But still, we have to see this long-term side because the carbon neutrality, like in the first session, North Korea is quite interesting for me because North Korea, 2050, unification with Korea could be realized, at that time it can be some kind of chance for Korea. So this carbon neutrality with Russia is already part. So for Japan, my opinion, it's quite important to reconstruct after the Ukraine crisis. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Director Harada. And thank you for keeping the time. Actually, we had successful roundtable yesterday, and we could discuss a lot about the energy security and the future cooperation. And I hope that we can learn something from Japan's experience and their structure for the energy security and future energy consumption. Okay, thank you, Mr. Harada again. And next presenter is Dr. Kaho from Verisk Maplecroft, and his theme is a trilemma for China: energy security, environmental sustainability, and economic development. You have 20 minutes. Dr. Yu, please.
Thank you, Professor. Can you open my slide, please? Yeah, thank you. Verisk Maplecroft is a political and ESG risk consultancy, and I myself focus on the energy policy research, and also I also lead the research on China-related issues, politics and market. And today we are going to look at the challenges of China, especially when it comes to energy and climate policy. So what we call it is a trilemma of how it can deal with all energy security, sustainability, and its economic development. In the previous presentation, our JOGMEC colleague gave us an overview of what the developed market in Asia are now facing. And now we try to move to the developing market in this region. And I would try to summarize some of those challenges that a lot of the markets are trying to overcome, which is we call the trilemma of energy. Here, a lot of countries, now we are focused on energy security, but at the same time, if you want to buy the energy, you have to be able to afford it. And at the same time, you have to think about if it is clean enough, sustainable enough. And we will put it in a triangle way, which is a trilemma, which means that it is very difficult for any government to maintain a good balance among three of them. You can't be too greedy to be able to achieve all of them. For example, if you have a very high energy security, then maybe you have to just pay a lot to achieve it, and it becomes an equity problem. Not sure if a country can afford it. And at the same time, for example, the easiest way to ensure energy security is go to the easy option like coal and things like that, and it brings up the sustainability problem. But at the same time, if you want to have a very clean and green economy, then you may want to do more renewable. But when, let's say, a COVID pandemic crisis hit or a Ukraine crisis hit the economy, then renewables does not seem to be a very reliable solution, and it also drives the energy insecurity and the affordability issues. So for countries like China, a developing country, a big market, emerging market, it is facing this kind of trilemma. And that's why we see a lot of inconsistency or kind of problems in the policy making. So here we try to look at the evolvement of China's energy security and its climate policy. And we should recognize that environmental element is becoming a more and more important agenda in its energy policy, despite there are a lot of insecurity concerns over the last few decades. So in the very beginning time when China was first established, they focused a lot on the self-reliance, which means to have enough energy supply for the basic supply. And then they move forward. In the 90s, they start to go overseas and to try to ensure supply, which means they import more, and that's why they want to secure the supply. And then in the third stage, they try to make it in a more mature way, have the strategy, which is the going out strategy. But at the same time, they also recognize there are some environmental issue. It is important to protect it, and that's why they also bring in the climate element in their energy policy. when it comes to the era of Xi Jinping, we know they are Belt and Road. And at the same time, it is very remarkable that China signed the Paris Agreement. And it is some of a commitment to tackle climate change. And even during the COVID, the government, they make the commitment to carbon neutrality. And this is trying to kind of even make a further step to commit to the climate campaign. But at the same time, because of the COVID and the Ukraine crisis, we do see that the government try to emphasize energy security as well, because the pandemic has disrupted the supply chain and it matters to the very basic survival of a country. And what is happening now is the Ukraine crisis, and this crisis is actually trigger the concern about the energy trilemma, or to simplify it, it is about which are we going to prioritize, energy security or energy transition. So throughout those the last few decades, we do see environmental issues becoming more and more important in the China's policy making. But at the same time, they cannot get away from the very basic challenge, how to prioritize economy or the environment. So if we look at what is happening now in Chinese energy and climate policy, there are of course a few key focuses. But to summarize it in one line is that they are actually taking a very conservative approach to find a way to balance between environmental goals and the self-reliance needs. So on the domestic side, we do see that they have set a target to peak the emission before 2030 and to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. I would not say these are some very difficult targets. I mean, they are relatively easy and they should be able to meet it. And at the same time, China also emphasized another objective, which is self-reliance, especially during the crisis when there are supply chain issues. And it is very important to address it. When they try to solve this reliance problem, they are emphasizing to produce more fossil fuels domestically, because they know that renewable, although they are emphasizing it, investing a lot in it, but it is not yet an immediate solution for them to enhance energy security. And that's why they have to rely on the traditional options. But this is not saying that they are going to just give up and go back to coal and things like that, because we also see that they are increasing the investment in renewables or cleaner application and utilization of fossil fuels, for example, to have more innovation in CCUS, or move to hydrogen, to use gas as transit option, encourage EV and etc. So they are trying multiple cuts on balancing energy security and environment targets. And at the same time, they also roll out some financial instrument, for example, the emission trading scheme or green bonds. But of course, some people would say that it is just a way to offset the emission. And let's go beyond the domestic market when they go overseas, because China is a big donor in a lot of markets. So they are trying to promote a green and efficient Belt and Road initiative, which means to attach some environmental condition in their investment to encourage greener model of business. They also invest in the clean energy and infrastructure, and at the same time they pledge to hold the overseas coal investment. Not to judge this, but at least this is something that they claim they want to do. They also try to promote global climate governance, which means to participate more in the organizations or platforms like the UNCOP, or to strengthen clean energy cooperation through their own initiative like AIIB and so on. And more importantly, it's about the international trade and investment cooperation with other countries to enhance energy security. So basically, it is talking the entire scope of energy options from renewables to the traditional fossil fuels. But the problem here is, let's say, they have a lot of good plans with goodwill to promote a climate campaign, a cleaner economy. But they cannot simply escape some structural factor. Because if we look at the energy consumption structure of China, actually coal is the core part of its energy system. And we know that there are a lot more non-fossil fuel investment in China. They are all very robust, expanding very fast, but it just takes time for them to become a ready substitution for fossil fuels, which means there's no magic button. It will just take time. And for the meanwhile, whenever there is a crisis or disruption, things like that, coal will just become the core option. And why are we saying that? Because a lot of people may say that maybe the expansion of renewable can be very fast and it can replace coal maybe in the next few years. But in reality, it is very difficult. China has been working very hard to phase out coal over the last decade. But if you look at the rate, or the pace of it, actually it is not that fast. It is reducing by kind of 1.something% per year. And now the share of coal in the electricity mix is around 60. So if you can imagine, if it is fading out around 1% per year, it will take a few decades for them to really achieve the objective to take away coal and replace by renewable. This means that the increasing electricity demand in the near future will still be relying on fossil fuels. And what does it mean when all these structural factors add up and there is a Ukraine crisis? I would say that actually the Ukraine crisis has widened the global division on energy transition. There is a consensus that climate change is very important, and energy transition is also basically a collective decision. However, what every country may have a different idea is how fast it should be. Of course, EU, US may think that they can speed up energy transition, but for a lot of Asian countries, they may not agree with that, or at least they may, energy transition is important, but maybe they should have a gradual one, a slower one, a more well-planned one. Especially during the Ukraine crisis, energy security, the concern has been brought up again, and that's why it's driven a lot of debate. The chart here is trying to show you some different categories of countries by looking at their energy security risk level and also the environmental regulatory strength. So most of the countries like China, India, and so on, and including EU, Japan, Korea, all of them are facing high energy security risk, and that's why we categorize them in a red area. But what makes them different is the pace of energy transition, which means a lot of those developing countries, those on the left-hand side, they are actually having a weaker environmental regulatory framework, which means they tend to have a slower energy transition. And on the right-hand side, those in the green box, which are the developed countries, they have a stronger framework, which means they tend to have a faster energy transition. Why there is a difference like this? It is mainly because for the developed countries, they tend to consider energy transition, including renewables, as part of the solution for energy security. In contrast, for developing countries, renewable is not yet a solution in the formula for energy security. For example, if you guys want to know of a coal, is renewable ready to pick it up? It is unlikely. And that's why there is a lot of concern. And eventually, these two groups of countries will have more and more debate on the pace of energy transition in the upcoming COPs, COP27, COP28, COP29. They will continue to debate it, and I would say there will be a division here. And finally, then what next for China? Where is its policy and climate policy going? I would say it will continue to take a very parallel approach, a balanced approach to pursue energy security, or they call it self-reliance, and a very gradual energy transition simultaneously. It sounds a little bit self-contradicting, but this is what China claimed that they want to do according to the latest energy white paper. So on one hand, they will try to boost the domestic fossil fuels for energy security. But at the same time, you will see a lot of investment in green technology, CCUS, renewables, and so on. But what is really that may hinder the progress is there are some challenges. First, they are not really going to get rid of this energy trilemma. Security, affordability, sustainability will always remain there. And because of this trilemma, we will expect China to continue to face the market fluctuation, especially when it comes to fossil fuels, the oil price going up and down. And because of this trilemma, the policy consistency will face kind of will keep change, especially when it comes to energy transition. The policy will always have be hindered by the need for energy security or economic development, and eventually there will be a lot of flip-flop in the policy making, and this will kind of delay the energy transition, and it will be quite difficult for investor to follow. And for a lot of climate or climate change or energy transition, they need a lot of international cooperation or global governance. But at the moment, we do see a lot of international tension that is related to China, no matter if it is just about geopolitics in the region or the US-China confrontation and things like that. It will eventually kind of hinder the cooperation, because a lot of these tensions are driven by some fundamental difference in the belief, and it is very to narrow it down, and it will always be an obstacle for energy and climate cooperation. And another challenge here is the question of the climate justice, because for China and other developing countries, because they have a slower pace of energy transition and their economy are more kind of vulnerable to change of any kinds of model, let's say to force them to move to a cleaner one or greener one. And this could mean some social risk or even unemployment. They may not catch up with that. And that's why in the upcoming COPs, I believe the topic of climate justice will just keep coming up, and it will become kind of a debate between the developed countries and the developing countries. And even worse is that the developing countries will kind of form kind of a negotiation bloc to collectively press the developed countries to maybe to offer more financial support for climate mitigation and things like that. And the last one, the emerging risk, is that for a lot of Asian countries, they lack a lot of infrastructure for kind of the energy transition. And as long as they are building it, they are also going to see some emerging risk, like the infrastructure and cybersecurity risk. How to govern the data related to the energy sector is also an emerging question for them. And if China is not able to solve these challenges, then I would say the path towards both self-reliance, which means energy security, and energy transition will be quite a difficult one. And that's all for my presentation, and thank you very much. Thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Well, we know that it's not easy to make both ends meet, and I'm sure that it's more difficult to make three ends meet. So we have to solve the trilemma of security, equitable development, and sustainability, and we will wait and see how China will solve these problems. And that can give us a lot of, well, insights and institutions. Okay, the next presenter is Ms. Zlata Se르게예바 from King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. And her title is Global Crossroads Between the Environmental Targets and the Energy Security. Two lenses for Russia. Two lenses for Russia. Okay, please.
Thank you. Could you please switch on my presentation? Thank you very much. So why two lenses? Oh, it doesn't. Oh, now it's working. Great. So I believe that in comparison to the most countries in the world, which are standing now at the crossroads between global energy security and their environmental sustainability, Russia actually is a unique position when it cannot achieve any of them without achieving the other. In this presentation, I will explain you why. So for Russia, I think that the conversation should be divided in two parts. First, we will look inside Russia at the Russian domestic energy policy, and we will see what environmental security and energy security means for the country from its domestic perspective. But also, you know that Russia has a lot of resources to influence what is happening in the global energy markets. That's why it's also very important to look through the international lens as well, because Russia is a major greenhouse gas emitter, and also Russia is one of the most important suppliers of the bridge fuel for the energy transition, which is natural gas. So let's start with the domestic lens. Before we start our conversation, I would like to tell you that if you want to learn more about Russian energy policy, I would advise you to scan this QR code. It will lead you to the research that my colleague Emre Hatipoglu and we published it at the beginning of the year in February 2022, where we discussed all the issues in all the sectors of Russian energy industry. But before we talk about the environmental priorities, let's actually define the energy security for Russia. If you look at the slide that I have presented, there are main takeaway points from the Russian energy security doctrine, which was adopted in 2019. And ironically enough, it was never changed ever since, despite the changing discourse of the Russian officials. So among the threats for the Russian energy security, back in 2019, Russia considered the change of the global energy mix, the development of renewable energy sources, the establishment of global gas markets, especially LNG markets, also global transition to the green economy. So all essential parts that are inevitable features of the energy transition. So basically, the main takeaway point that I want to carry out from my presentation would be that for Russia, the most basic value was energy security. And energy security was the ultimate target, because of which all environmental targets were developed. Why so? Honestly, Russia have been a laggard in climate policy. It ratified the Paris Agreement only in 2019. And on this slide, you can see the timeline of the Russian energy transition measures, both from the policymakers as well from the industry. And even if you cannot read through the letters because they're very small from here, but you can see that basically everything starts in 2020, after the carbon border adjustment mechanism in the EU was announced. Honestly, CBAM became a major trigger for Russia to develop its energy policies, because according to the estimates of Russian experts, CBAM could cost Russian exporters, industries like oil and gas or steel-making industry, a lot of losses, starting from 2 to 8 billion euros by 2030. So it was a major trigger why Russia started developing its environmental focused documents. So in 2020, Russia published its hydrogen roadmap. It adopted its energy strategy, where it first mentioned hydrogen targets. For example, it was going to export very dismal amount of hydrogen, 0.2 million tons in 2024, but still it was a very unique target for Russia, because previously hydrogen was not mentioned in any documents at all. Also, you can see that 2021, the next year, which followed after that legislation, was even more fruitful in terms of low carbon energy development agenda. Russia started talking about hydrogen more, Also, LNG, aiming to take up to 20% of the global LNG market by 2030. Also, Russia started talking about potential profits that could arise from for Russia from the energy transition. For example, just from the sales of hydrogen by 2030 or 2050, Russia was aiming to receive more than $100 billion per year by exporting several million tons of hydrogen. The companies were even more optimistic. Major Russian gas exporters like Gazprom and Novatek started developing projects with the European and Asian partners. In the end of 2020, Novatek opened its carbon-neutral LNG fueling station in Germany. Then they started signing MOUs on hydrogen development with European partners like Total Energies. They decided, like Novatek, decided to convert its Opsky LNG plant to Opsky gas chemistry complex, which would produce more than 2 million tons of ammonia per year, starting from 2026. So actually the future seemed very promising. They had very ambitious plans for 2023 and onwards. For example, in 2023, Russia was going to introduce the obligation for major emitters to announce how many emissions they make. Russia was talking about introduction of carbon market, about increased exports of hydrogen. It was supposed to start exporting hydrogen in 2024. Companies were talking about using hydrogen for steel making. So a lot of plans were made. But then 2022 happened. So if I could summarize the difference, the drastic difference which happened due to the current geopolitical situation, it would be in this sentence, that the projects planned by the government are still being carried on, but the companies do suffer. For example, you can see on this slide in 2022, for example, when Russia introduced the obligation for European countries to pay for gas in rubles, Gazprom started shutting down gas supplies to Europe. Thank you. Also, Novatek announced navigation problems along the Northern Sea route because it couldn't procure commercial satellite data from the European partners, and also they delayed final investment decision on the Opsky hydrogen and ammonia plant, which was a very promising project. But what about the state plans? As for now, they are going as planned. And maybe the unique experiment, it is truly unique experiment, is now happening right now in Sakhalin Oblast, in Sakhalin region in Russia. Sakhalin region is in the far east of Russia, and I'm going to talk about it for a while because I believe that it can become a truly successful project for enhancing the world experience. Why so? Because it's the region which is heavily industrial. 60% of its regional domestic product comes from the heavy industries. It has, for example, Sakhalin-2 gas and oil complex. However, at the same time, the measures to achieve carbon neutrality announced by Russia over there, they do not include only procuring offsets. That's how usually the problem of achieving carbon neutrality is being solved nowadays. No, actually the government has planned actual measures to decrease its emissions, and it's not only relying on forestry. Another takeaway point for the global community can be that Sakhalin region decided to become carbon neutral by 2025. So basically by the end of 2025. So in 3 years' time, we will be able to see if they succeeded or not. Overall, there are at least two more regions in Russia that are going to achieve carbon neutrality. It was announced so, but so far it is unclear whether it would be feasible or not. So let's just focus on Sakhalin region. So its current emissions is a little bit more than 12 million tons per year. It is the data of 2019. And the absorption potential of Sakhalin forests are a little bit more than 11 million tons per year. So the reductions needed are approximately a little bit more than 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So what Sakhalin region is doing now is that they decided to gasify. They decided to achieve 100% gasification. So they're doing switch from coal to gas. They also going to introduce gas vehicles and electric vehicles. They decided to eliminate illegal dumping, and for that purpose, they used the drones to basically create digital schemes of all landfills to properly decide how to close them. Also, development of renewable energy sources, boosting energy efficiency, and potentially even developing a CCUS project. Speaking about the renewable energy project, the most famous one is the solar plant on Iturup Island, which already sold the credits. In the end of September, the first trading session on the Russian exchange took place, where 20 credits were sold, and the initial price of the credit was a little bit more than $15 per ton of CO2. But as a result of the trade, the deals were closed at a little bit more than $17 per ton. 10 units were procured by Sberbank, which is the largest bank of Russia, and another 10 units by a wood processing company. Yes, these amounts are small, but we have to begin with something. However, there is a little problem. Unfortunately, from 2019, the emissions have already increased. So on this graph, you might not see exactly what the measures are over there, but you can still see this little red bar at the end of the graph. So basically, if we sum up the reduction potential of all the measures announced, like gasification, introduction of electric and natural gas vehicles, we still see that for now, it is not enough to achieve the increased emissions which took place in 2021. So it means that some extra projects will be needed. So let's look at the second lens, at the international dimension. So here I should say that Russia is a crucial partner for both Asia and European Union. Here I focus more on the European Union because European Union is linked to Russia with the pipeline system. And for many decades, Russia has been supplying more than 40% of total European gas imports. And as you can see, as a result of the measures introduced by the Russian government, when Gazprom was unable to sell gas in other currency, only through rubles, and then it started cutting supplies. It cut supplies to almost all major consumers, like Germany, France, Poland, at least partially, but the cuts were present over there. You can see from these graphs depict pipeline flows, two major pipeline flows to the Central Europe and to the northwestern Europe, which is mainly Nord Stream. So after the explosion at the Nord Stream pipelines, the natural gas supplies to Europe through that route are non-existent anymore. But the problem is that Okay. The problem is that actually Russia is also heavily dependent on the European Union because European Union is responsible for the bulk of Russian gas supplies abroad. So what are the consequences for the environment? If we're talking about the European Union, the most evident solution for the countries is to ramp up their coal consumption. That's what we have seen in the second half of 2021 when the gas prices were extremely high, and also throughout 2022 when the geopolitical situation added up to the energy crisis in Europe. So countries like Germany and Netherlands and Serbia, North Macedonia, UK, they all reverted to coal. Some delayed phasing out of coal facilities, some increased coal imports. However, it's not only coal. Even substituting pipeline gas with LNG, according to the estimates of Rystad Energy, led to increased emissions in the European Union. In 2022, it was plus 15 million extra tons of CO2 equivalent. And in the coming years, it would be up to 25 or 35 million tons of extra CO2 emissions. Why so? Because natural gas from other sources, mainly LNG from Algeria or United States, is more carbon intensive than LNG from Russia or even pipeline gas from Russia. So as you can see from this graph provided by Kairos, a company which is doing satellite surveying, Kairos is stating that emissions per month throughout 2022 were around 50, 70, 80% higher than in the same month last year. So you see that geopolitical conflict is negatively affecting the environmental situation in Europe. However, as I have already told, Europe also matters to Russia. So European countries in total, it's European Union plus the other countries situated in Europe that received gas from Russia, they accounted for almost 80% of Russian supplies abroad. So Russia cannot just easily cross out them from its life. Even if we're talking about hydrogen, which, as was already mentioned by the other speakers, which was considered by Russia as a fuel for the future that could save Russian positions in the energy markets. Just look at this map. You will see that actually most of the projects are focused on mainly European markets. You see the green marks, they indicate projects that are European oriented. The purple projects are both European and Asia Pacific oriented. But if you look at their geographic location, you will conclude that by economic means it makes more sense to transport this hydrogen to Europe than to Asia Pacific. So it means that nearly half of all the projects is Europe dependent. And if it is going to happen, it's highly questionable nowadays. So, to conclude and sum up all the thoughts that I mentioned here. First of all, environmental security was a result of providing for energy security of Russia. And as a result of the current geopolitical crisis, Russian energy security, mainly supplies to foreign partners, have been significantly compromised. So, since we have high threats to energy security, there is a high question if the environmental issues will still matter at such grave situation. And even if they will matter, will the announced targets be achieved or not? Because, as you know, many projects were realized together with foreign partners. It is the question of finance, it is the question of technologies, because Russian energy industry is heavily reliant on foreign technologies. Several years ago, in LNG production, the reliance on foreign technologies was more than 70%. Even as of now, according to the official data by the Ministry of Energy, the reliance consists around 40% in oil and gas industry overall, which is still very, very high. Also, Russia is a major greenhouse gas emitter. So whatever the consequences for the relations with the European Union and Asian partners are going to be, or whether they are going to buy Russian oil and gas or not, Russian aspirations to achieve carbon neutrality will be crucial for the whole global community to achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement. Without Russia, it won't be really possible because Russia is a major greenhouse gas emitter. Also, Russia is a major supplier of natural gas, which is supposed to be the crucial fuel for the energy transition in many countries. So if Russia stops supplying it, or will the countries be able to achieve their targets in their turn or not? That's a high question. So that is why I could say that there exists high interdependency between Russian energy security and environmental priorities. And I would echo the words of my previous colleagues, especially Mr. Harada, that said that this point of view might be not really popular, but without cooperation between Russia and its energy partners and the whole global community, it will be really difficult to achieve all ambitious targets that were announced. So hopefully the crisis will soon be resolved and the situation will become more favorable to realization of environmental projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Se르게예바. And I also hope that we can solve the problem through the cooperation between Russia and its energy partners. Okay, well, we'll have a 5 minutes break because as it seems that there is some problem with the Zoom connection with Eric Rahul.
No, there is not.
Rahul, are you there?
Yes.
There's
I'm there.
something wrong with the system. So please, well, wait for just for 5 minutes. I'm sorry about this. Okay, thank you. Now the system is on again. And hello to Mr. Eric Rauw in Amsterdam, Netherlands. And his title is How to Contribute to Energy and How to Contribute to Environment Security and How to Contribute to Transition globally and in Europe. So, well, Eric is the co-author of Touching Hydrogen Future, and he will give us a presentation within 20 minutes. Please.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure and honor to be here at the conference, even though virtually. My name is Eric Raku. I'm today here in my capacity as initiator and course of Touching Hydrogen Future. I will talk about hydrogen as an example of a way addressing climate and energy security issues. Few words, you're most welcome to connect on LinkedIn to me. On my background, I'm specialized in energy policy, but also, as I mentioned, initiated the book that has been now read in over 120 countries. And one personal thing of interest, we are now thinking of edition 2. So, and we would particularly like authors who are interested to write about Korea come forward. So there is an email here. Do contact me to discuss this if you are interested. Now, what is the big picture, the world we are today? Energy and the climate are still both important. And from the perspective, I, as a specialist working globally in hydrogen markets, which are part of energy transition, volatility is indeed the new normal. If we look to why low carbon hydrogen, green hydrogen, pink hydrogen, all of those colors are so interesting, it is because globally we indeed did sign a Paris Agreement, and we have an issue which hydrogen can be part of solution. Yeah, And it was very nicely outlined by one of the previous speakers. There are conceptually indeed 4 ways to address the net zero challenge. It is change our way of life. It is energy efficiency. It is finding alternatives, and that is where low carbon hydrogen comes in. And then it's carbon offsets or carbon capture. Europe is doing all 4. I think that is an interesting concept. And that's why also, because of the Green Deal and commitment, Europe is a very interesting market to invest. So why hydrogen? Well, it's a key climate measure. We see improving economics, and there is a strong policy push. Let me unpack some of those things. So, key climate measure, if one starts introducing through policy push, for example, carbon pricing, an EU emission trading scheme is an example, but we obviously see also globally in countries like China, carbon markets being introduced, then one does see in the abatement curve that after direct electrification has been tried, due to its properties to be able to store energy, hydrogen is a very clear abatement option. On the improving economics, I would say that it's not just about what is the current value. It is also about what is it that we want to pay as green premium in the future. So one of the speakers says, why would I change if the cost of my current alternative using oil and gas is cheaper? Let me tell you a small story. So when Ford in 1910 started selling his car, he didn't price it at 1 horse. So the car price was $950. The average price of a horse in United States in 1910 was $150. So you can do the mathematics. The price of the car was 6 horses. So if we take that metaphor, customers apparently didn't think that 1 horse is worth 1 car. They saw that 6 horses are worth 1 car. And so it is about value of the new product, not just about the cost of the old. And what we see in the market, that they're increasingly, because of decarbonization, because of policy, both carrots and sticks, we see customers valuing their non-emitting nature of hydrogen and willing to pay a premium in some cases. In other cases, it's policy that is creating the premium. In addition, the volatile energy markets do also put a pressure, as recently, for example, gas prices, improving economics. Finally, policy push. Indeed, there, as mentioned by one of the speakers, recovery funds, for example, in Europe, are providing a huge push. Now, the biggest push actually is coming in the United States with Inflation Reduction Act, and very, very stimulating measure of $3 per kilogram of per kilogram of green hydrogen. That stimulus will be offered to production of hydrogen in the United States. I do believe personally this is a big game changer, and we definitely see globally many companies coming in there. So if we summarize, why is it that hydrogen is a market that is indeed can be a trillion investment a year opportunity, roughly? Some numbers say 800 billion a year to meet the net zero targets in 2050. Why is it like this? Because it's a key climate measure. We do see improving economics, and with the scale of projects and investment, this economics will further improve. And we do see a large policy push, and you do need all those 3 things for it to be successful. Other questions that previous speakers posed as to what are, let's say, critical questions around hydrogen markets. Yes, they are good questions, but they are being addressed. So there are various demand use cases across the world depending on policies. I'm personally because we are today here in Korea, I'm personally very, very enthused that Korea has adopted already as a leading nation as a secure hydrogen act. It's also looking to use hydrogen in power generation and also indeed developing its economy. I think that is very interesting what's going on in Korea. And I've been talking to some people invested in this economy, and I can see why interest in hydrogen from energy security perspective and from climate perspective. And I think that is very interesting, and always happy to continue dialogue on that. There is an interesting common denominator between Japan and Korea and Western Europe. If you do the mathematics based on current various models and predictions and forecasts, then there are 3 geographies that are most likely most interested in global trade and imports in the future. And it is starting with Japan, Korea, and Europe. So there is a common denominator. And this trade can roughly be, let's say, 25% perhaps. But those are, of course, estimates. So if we look around what drives policies and why are they different, right, in energy transition? If you do some polling online, one see that some countries will find urgency of decarbonization that's driving their strategies. Others have a certain vision, geopolitics, and of course, sanctions do influence that. And that is, as one of the previous speakers said, an example where the global trade of natural gas totally changed, with the events and war between Russia and Ukraine. Is there import urgency? Yes, in some countries, definitely. What I'm very positively surprised by is what I saw in numbers, for example, that Korea plans to import 80% of its hydrogen, according to some of the documents, by 2050. Europe, in its recent REPowerEU plans, takes a balance of 50-50, 50% domestic production, 50% imports. So you see various comfortability level with reliance on global markets. Policies are different. You can structure them. What I think is interesting, if you look to the way policies are structured, that we don't really globally yet have an auction mechanism which matches supply and demand for hydrogen. I think there is definitely an opportunity there. And we see some mechanisms, and I think Europe is an example of this with the H2 Global, where Europe tries to find global buyers and global sellers, and through one platform organize and bring together parties that don't know yet each other in order to make the next step in the hydrogen build up economic. Because what hydrogen needs is indeed projects, again projects, and again projects. And from the work I do globally, I can see that it's all coming up. We've seen the first final investment decisions. Banking community is ready to invest. They're very interested. But we do need policy measures to get through the first projects so that, like 10, 15 years ago, with, for example, large-scale offshore wind deployment, the steps can be taken. This was a teaser of discussion on hydrogen economy as an example for solutions for energy security and climate. Again, my interest today here as an individual is to draw attention that we are very keen to also, as part of Touching Hydrogen Future Community, to further develop the book, to let the use cases be imagined, And we are looking for an author from Korea, so that would be very interesting. That's why I agreed to do this speech in this conference. So thank you very much for your attention. I have a note to make. I will, due to previous commitments, have to leave in 9 minutes from now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for finding your time very early in the morning in your Netherlands. And we are very, very grateful that you took a chance to express your opinions and your views on hydrogen issues, which is very important in decarbonization, and also which is related to our very closely related to our theme here in this session. So as a continuation of these sessions, and I would like to pass over to our first discussant, Dr. Sim from Korea Environmental Institute. Please, I'd like to hear that your opinions on our sessions and your views on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Chang-Sub Sim from KEI. Actually, I'm doing a research for climate change science and air pollution, and also the like relating policy stuff. And actually, it was very interesting to hear the very nice talk, all the information from neighboring countries, the status of energy, and a lot of crisis stuff. And actually, I want to rather a little bit different aspect in terms of climate change. Probably all of here people know about the importance of the actions for climate change, but I want to address a little bit more scientifically. Actually, UN set up the goal to control the global mean temperature increase under 1.5 degree. You know why? Because the rapid change of water supply and other climate impact may have through the extinction of biosphere. That's the key point we are talking about, temperature increase control. And that actually relate to, yesterday we also have the roundtable issue, but there's also closely related to the food supply stuff, and also the extinctions of biodiversity. That's the key point of our effort to climate change. But there is a serious message last year. You know, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, last year report, they said there is actually 50-50 chance that the temperature increase over 1.5 degree in next 5 years, which means that probably by 2026, the temperature increase rather over our target, which means that there is actually we are already failing to control the climate change. So we have to understand the situation is very different in 2000 and 1990s, which is already we suffer seriously, and the biodiversity and the situation is getting has a big problem now. So another concern is that for example, the sea surface temperature around Korea is already increased more than 1 degree, which means that sea surface temperature means that the heat capacity of water is 1,000 times larger than atmosphere, which means that already increased one temperature of sea surface means that we cannot go back to the status of 1990s or 2000. So now I can say we have to now not to think about response to against climate change or like a carbon trade or markets or something. We have to really think about how to survive under this crisis. So this is actually, I can say, the scientific status of now. And so I can say maybe 2 points of actually we can survive. And first thing is we have to focus on the R&D stuff, which is really important. My R&D saying is not to like a general science, which I need to say is that the R&D for survival. So one of the example I can rather address is renewable energy. Important is a very good answer for the climate change, but I can rather address to say we have to first make a stable management of electric power supply, because our renewable energy now has no like a stable system, because renewable energy doesn't have a stable supply of electric power. So if heat wave happen actually in the night, for example, the soaring need of electric power can break out electrical facilities, which means that this breakout can suddenly kill a lot of old people, vulnerable people against heat waves. That cannot imagine how serious it will be. So, for example, that's why the smart grid like a technology is so important, and we have to make this higher priority. And 1990s, some people researched for the geoengineering. You know about the geoengineering, which is kind of making spreading out the salt in the atmosphere, and they are making some clouds, and they reflect the incoming solar energy back to the universe, which is kind of imaginary science at the time, 1990s. But now we have to really think about geoengineering. Can make us alive. So, for example, we have to seriously consider the survival technology. So we have to really seriously think about how to repel the incoming solar energy back to our universe, and how to utilize the stronger solar energy in the universe or in the space outer Earth, and transfer that energy to the surface. So you can say, oh, this is so like imaginary, but this is actually we have to think about right now. So, so finally, I can say, based on this survival strategy, not kind of like a general climate responding like issues, we have to move on the survival strategy and serious effort for this survival. We can talk about international cooperation based on this survival strategy. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jung. You make me afraid. And sorry for being absent for a minute, Mr. Eric Rao. Well, as Dr. Harada is scheduled to have another meeting online, so while I was talking about that outside camera, and I didn't expect that your presentation would end quite quickly. So that's why I was not here for a minute. Sorry about this. And well, Dr. Shim emphasized the survival of a human being. And can he survive? Okay. So next discussant is Dr. Lee Kwang-tae from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. You can use 10 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I'm honored to serve as a discussant Mr. Rao's presentation, since Mr. Rao said he will have to leave in a couple of minutes, so I'm not sure he will stay until I finish my discussion. But anyway, I want to thank Mr. Rao because as I am serving a discussion of his presentation, I had the opportunity to read his book touching hydrogen future, and it was quite fascinating, the way of presenting new information about hydrogen-based society in the future, and as well as his passion and his colleagues' will to educate many people around the world about hydrogen economy. So as a reader of the book, I want to thank the authors, and I was quite, frankly, I was shocked, and because not just me, but I believe many Koreans still remain ignorant or dismissive of this crucial way to reach net zero using hydrogen. So it was a very introductory and educational book. So, and I recommend many people, I will recommend definitely my students reading the book. And if Mr. Rahul permits, I want to be one of the translators of his book into Korean someday. One thing I feel sorry about his book and presentation was that, as he already pointed out, the book is missing South Korea's story. So I just want to a little bit touching upon the South Korea's situation about hydrogen. As a matter of fact, South Korea has a great potential that could contribute to developing new technologies that can help us find good answers to the questions for the better use of hydrogen. In his book, Mr. Rahul asked many questions. How can we cut the price of hydrogen without relying on fossil fuel? How can we generate green electricity to electrolyze more hydrogen? How can we increase efficiency of producing hydrogen? And what could be the ways to increase the density of hydrogen in storage, and so on and so forth. And actually, many Korean companies and government researchers in government institutions are trying their best to solve these very hard questions. And recently, we can see many news in the media that the Koreans really are achieving technological breakthroughs regarding these issues of hydrogen. And as you all know, Hyundai Motors launched hydrogen vehicles already several years ago. But one thing we should worry about is that the leadership of the Korean government and some big companies show little, if not none, interest in paying more attention to hydrogen. For example, in the National Assembly hearing last year, the CEO of POSCO, one of the biggest steel producers in the world and in Korea as well, repeated his view and the agenda of hydrogen steel making, but did not provide any detailed plan, probably because of the economic crisis these years. So we can understand that, but we hope the big companies do more. And another example is that the Hyundai also postponed its launching of a new line of hydrogen vehicles by a year or two. Samsung is in the similar situation, although it decided to enter RE100 only this September. So I think the biggest problem is not lack of ability, but lack of will. The Koreans, as a very audacious and daunting people, Koreans fear being unchanged and being left behind. So even though there are many difficult situations, economic inflations and recessions, but I believe Koreans definitely do more and to contribute to expanding the knowledge and the technology about hydrogen. So, and if Mr. Raho is still here, still with us, I want to ask him a couple of questions, but I'm not sure he's with us.
He's not with us, yeah.
Oh, okay, he'll have to. So I will email him. So yeah, personally. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
thank you very much.
so, well, thank you, Dr. Lee. And I think it would be better for Mr. Rao to have a chance of answering the questions raised by Dr. Lee. Is it possible? Are you there?
I'm still here.
Okay.
I rearranged my meeting, so please go ahead. And
Okay.
thank you very much for reading the book. It's I'm happy to discuss separately about translating to Korean. It's yeah, it's an interesting
Yeah,
offer.
great. And my question was about your idea about nuclear energy. So in South Korea, we have a hot debate whether we should continue nuclear energy or we should phase out. So I think in European Union, many people have different ideas. For example, I heard that Germany already had decided to phase out nuclear power generation last year, but they just changed their mind because of the Ukraine war. So what is your take, or what do you think the nuclear power energy can play a role in expanding hydrogen economy? This is my question.
Yeah, thank you. So I think when you think about nuclear energy with all the caveats that it has, right? If we look, we should always think of next generation where the safety issues are much more improved. And I think when we think in those terms, that is understandable that some countries in Europe are actually now taking up nuclear energy development. So we see countries like Poland, Netherlands actively investigating. So it's no longer just a traditional proponent of nuclear energy like France. Also close to European Union, United Kingdom is actively pursuing nuclear energy. So once you now zooming out renewable energies and the energy mix, if we're gonna install a lot of offshore wind, for example, particularly, and we do gonna install a lot of offshore wind in Europe, increasing the power mix extremely, so to being renewable, one will find that out of the 8,760 hours that the year has, you will have, let's say, roughly at least for wind 3,500 hours that no nuclear energy would be required in a country where you have renewables and nuclear. What do you then do with the predominantly baseload of nuclear energy? And one idea that has been also developed in some studies is to use that energy then to produce hydrogen, so to give a stable revenue stream to nuclear energy also in the hours that it's not needed for traditional use in power, but rather to direct it towards molecules. And once you start thinking about it this way, also using heat from the nuclear energy power plants and combining it, for example, with the solid oxide technology, then it starts becoming interesting. And I was part of some of the discussions around this in a study lunch some time ago, which was a study sponsored by some of their nuclear energy expertise firms. And I was at the presentation of this study. And I must say, I was impressed by this argument, and I do see that it's finding more proponents in European policy debates. Also, you see that through the fact that in policy documents, making use of nuclear energy to then feed electrolysis and then come to zero carbon hydrogen through that is not excluded as an option. So it's on the table, and I think we have to see how this will develop further. But it can be very promising, because one of the key issues, and here I will finish, one of the key issues of hydrogen economy is actually that a lot of off-takers want to switch, but they are afraid there is not enough zero carbon hydrogen. So by solving the volume question and providing security, also including use of nuclear energy, it's a very interesting way to give assurance that there will be enough hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives to switch to hydrogen as an alternative to fossil fuels currently. I stop here. I hope I gave you a context for your question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rao. And we are hoping that the hydrogen can be an alternative to the existing energy system. Okay, next discussant is Dr. Kim Do-hoon, please.
Thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be here and participate in this seminar as a discussant. And my discussion mainly focuses on Dr. Yu's presentation, which is titled "A Trilemma for China: Energy Security, Environmental Sustainability, and Economic Development." And this presentation categorized the evolution of China's energy policy into 4 stages, and analyzed how the political and economic factors cause the changes in the core contents of China's energy policy at each stage. And at the same time, it sheds light on the environmental policies that China is pushing strongly, both internationally and domestically, in order to play the role of internationally responsible power. And in addition, it emphasized, due to the Russian and Ukraine war, China has revived its self-sufficiency energy strategy again, which was the key value in the first stage he labeled. But now this strategy is putting China in a trilemma of achieving 3 different policy goals at the same time: securing energy security, promoting environmental sustainability, and achieving economic development. Since I'm not an expert on this issue, so I'd like to raise a few questions instead of further discussion. The first one is that in the first stage, which was in the Cold War era, China has chosen self-reliance strategy, but afterwards it relinquished the strategy due to the surge of energy demand in China. Therefore, expanding energy export and import and reinforcing supply security has become the core of China's energy strategy. But Dr. Yu has emphasized Xi Jinping's China is reviving self-sufficiency policy again, but I believe the energy demand in China is still increasing and even bigger than the first stage. So, which means the demand structure of energy in China hasn't changed. So then do you think the revival of self-reliance policy can be maintained in the future? For example, Germany, which was the most active country in energy transition, is also temporarily restarting the thermal power plants, as well as other European countries such as the Netherlands or Italy. And the second question is, it is called trilemma, but as clearly stated in your presentation, hasn't China showed its policy priority? When I read the text alone, it seems that the top priority of Xi Jinping's regime is energy security of the country, and that climate change response and environmental policy promotion will only be done under the premise of economic growth. I'm not sure I understood correctly. But even if it's a trilemma, there can be priorities, of course. And out of three policy goals, which one do you think China values most when they enter force? The third one is under the Belt and Road Initiative. China has strengthened the cooperative relations with Russia by signing flagship agreement includes pipeline or Yamal LNG deals. And the Russia and Ukraine war spurred the cooperation. And as you mentioned, China is the beneficiary of the war, for it can import lots of natural gas from Russia that would have exported to Europe at a very discounted price. So I can assume the bilateral energy cooperation between China and Russia will be strengthened even more and accelerates the block situation of world energy system. And what do you think the implication of these for the countries in the Northeast Asia, especially South Korea and Japan? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kim. Maybe Dr. Yu can give you an answer a little bit later. And next discussant is Dr. Jung, and please.
Yeah, thank you very much for very interesting discussions and presentation. Before starting my discussion, first I would like to give yeah, I'm starting again. Rebooting. Yeah, so before starting my discussions on this renowned presenters, I would like to give my questions first, then I will begin my discussion. Otherwise, maybe in the end, I might do not have time to ask questions. First of all, I would like to ask a question to Dr. Yu. China is one of the leaders in the development of renewable facilities and renewable technologies and electric cars. And I would like to ask what is the driver behind this fast development of renewable machines, renewable technologies and electric cars. It is more market driven, or it is driven by government policy or government subsidies, or is also or a combination of these factors? Because I'm very interested, because when we see that the important products related to renewable energies is quite often is related to Chinese companies. So I would like to hear your opinion about the driver of a renewable development in China. And then secondly, before starting with my major discussion, with Zlata about Russia, I would like to ask a question to Dr. Sim, because for me it's a new area and I don't know very well about this climate issues and its atmospheric issues. So I would like to ask one question to you. So I heard that there's when there's accumulation of CO2 or greenhouse gases exceeds some points, and there's no return points. I heard there are no return points, and how I would like to hear opinion about if it your prospect, your outlook or your prognosis about reaching this no return points, and when do you think it will we will reach the no return point, or do you think it can be avoided, or if we will reach the no return point without any other escape options, when do you think it will happen? Is my basic question. I don't know it very well, but I would like to listen to your opinions. Then I want to start my discussion with Zlata Sergeyeva about the Russian energy. And my what is very interesting for me was Russia is an exporter of energy products, and South Korea is an importer of energy products. But I see some similarity. I see some similar worries or concerns or issues that we need. The South Korea has to solve, and I see some common issues, which is South Korea is one of the heaviest emitter of CO2 or greenhouse gases, and also that strengthening environmental regulation, international regulation, or introduction of CBAM, yes, it's a carbon border adjustment mechanism in the European Union. Is also in Korea is a big issue, because it increases the cost to Korean exporters. So Korean companies and the government try to find a solution to how do you say that, to overcome or to solve these issues with the industry and government and interested parties. So I would like to hear that the Russian industry, Russian economy is quite largely based on an energy industry that it needs to decarbonize to keep up export or to how do you say that to do with the environmental regulations, and I would like to ask how not only Russian but globally the energy companies are trying to how to say solve this decarbonizing energy industry issues. So for example, that I heard the news that the energy companies are trying to decarbonize oil industry or decarbonize oil production or decarbonize LNG export, or decarbonize the gas industry to be more be attractive to buyers or to be more attractive to finance institutions which finance all the energy project, or to be more how do you say that more to attract more financing and get access to buyer market is my question, and I will continue my discussion. I studied now, but I'll be very short. Yeah, I'll finish in. I asked question for 5 minutes, so I will do my discussion within 5 minutes to be on time. After reading our discussion, Ms. Zlatasek gave us the article. I also began to study about this theme, and I found some interesting facts that Russia is one of the countries. Russia is the country which suffers most from climate changes. Actually, yeah. Maybe not the maybe if not the most, one of the most, because I have found out that the climate change are happening the fastest in the Arctic region in the world, which is the large territory of Russia is in the Arctic region, and I see there's some news that because of how to say global warming, the inhabitants in the Arctic region are suffering from climate change. For example, there's the melting permafrost in the Arctic region. Because of this, the buildings are crumbling. Or I saw the airport runways are destroyed because of the ice below the land have been melted, and the airport was destroyed. Or I saw in the YouTube, I saw some houses of normal people living in the Arctic. The houses are destroyed because of a melting permafrost, and also there was some disease was spreading in the Arctic region after the dead deers, the deer which died 100 years ago was melted again, and then it was when deer came out of this ice, then they spread some disease. So I think that's also one of the reasons. And it was really interesting that Russia began to pay more attention to climate issues and to decarbonizing issues and to green industry issues as soon as the European Union have announced the carbon border edges mechanism. I didn't know about it, and it was it was really interesting for me that it was major motivation, a very important motivation for Russia to pay more attention to the climate issues, and climate is very I gave a long questions. So in order to listen to answers of answers to my questions, I will stop here, and if there will be more time later, then I will discuss more about the work of a very interesting work of Ms. Zlatasek. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think no, thank you. Yeah, one simple answer to Dr. Seng's question about the motivation of driving the renewable energy in Russia is money. Sorry. Well, the last discussant, but not least, Dr. Lee Ju-sung will make some discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for providing this wonderful occasion to become a discussant in front of the most prominent 4 presenters regarding energy issues. And it was very informative and insightful, so I learned very much, a lot, and it has raised so many research questions as well as so many ideas about the agenda. Actually, I have prepared some comments and questions for Dr. Harada, but since he's not here, I might have to skip the questions, but I would like to make a quick comments about his presentation because his ideas caught my eyes because South Korea and Japan shares the similar ideas and similar situation or dilemma regarding this issue because both states have geographically greater liability than chances in terms of renewable energy because as he mentioned in his PowerPoint, solar and wind energy is limited and hydro energy is exploited and nuclear energy, we both have hot discussions still going on in terms of politics and in terms of economic as well as social aspect. So I quite agree to his idea that currently the most realistic and concrete approach to realizing this great big agenda is by energy saving, diversification, and energy mix for now. And he also mentioned that hydrogen will be the star symbol of clean energy in the future. I agree to his idea, but I also share similar thoughts that there's larger problem than chances regarding hydrogen. Since I'm not an expert in this issue, so I'm just going to throw out my ideas about the issue, just without much of a knowledge, but still, it seems that it's much more expensive than the fossil fuels, so I might have to agree with Dr. Harada regarding the issue. So maybe, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, Dr. Rahu. Yes, Dr. Rahu mentioned about the value of the hydrogen. Yes, I agree to his idea, but for example, Porsche or Ferrari, yes, I know it's very much valuable, but I cannot afford it. And so maybe that's the dilemma that most of the countries in the world are sharing. So maybe the cost and the expensive, even though valuable, the affordability might be one of the issues that it might come from hydrogen. And in terms of technology, for example, it is highly sophisticated technology. So as far as I know, only Japan and Germany have the sufficient technology to actually make something out of from this hydrogen issue. So maybe the last phrase you mentioned about expensive millennium game would be the best summarize for the hydrogen issue, I think. So, so that's my comment about his presentation, and I have quickly made two questions to all the presenters. First one is about the loopholes in the global agenda of this issue we're talking about, because European Union and the European states, they are leading the discourse and they have the technology to lead the ideas. And it's highly possible that they're going to reach the goal compared to the other states. And I personally believe that it will be most profitable for the states who are actually leading the business, leading the agenda. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a Marxist, I'm a realist. So that's just my idea. And the reason I raised this question is because most of the states are faced with at least a dilemma or trilemma, because China, Japan, and Korea, we are trying to follow the discourse and we are trying to follow up the technology, but we are not sufficient in both agendas. And in case of oil-producing states like Middle Eastern states or even Russia, they are facing dilemma because it is connected with sustainable economic development as well as matching up the agenda. And we also have the other developing states who are trying to find the cheapest way to acquire energy from the world. So there's a strong feeling that I cannot erase the feeling that maybe most of the states in the world prefer gradual or a delayed transition to this agenda. So if you have any objections or if you have any ideas about that, I would like to hear from you. And my second question is more fundamental about the issue, because 2 weeks ago I had a chance to participate in the conference hosted by Korea Institute of Economic Policy, KIEP. Yes, they had a conference about emerging regional studies conference, something like that. And I participated in the African session regarding this green growth energy issue. And they were mentioning about just transition because they believe that who is the real victim and who's actually making the agenda, and those kind of issues are going on in the developing world or emerging world. So if you have any comments about that, I would like to hear from your specialties. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee. We are talking about a problem, dilemma, trilemma, and survival. Wow, I'm really afraid about this. And so, well, let the two presenters can have the chances of answering the questions. So first of all, Dr. Yu.
First, thank you for all the comments and the questions. Unfortunately, only 2 speakers left, so it's all on us now. I will answer Dr. Kim's question first. So the first question is about China's self-reliance strategy or the objective, and if it can sustain its growing demand for energy. I think China it is not saying that China is going to simply rely on domestic production. I mean, they will continue to import to do trade and investment overseas. But the idea here is more about they have been over-relying on foreign supplies for many years, for I think two decades and so. And that's why when the pandemic hit and when there are trade war and when there are Ukraine crisis, it is kind of an alarm call for China that they can it is better not to rely so much on foreign supplies. And that's why they started to shift to strengthen the domestic production, kind of at least as a backup plan. So during the COVID, I mean, if you look at the capex of the state-owned company of China, they have reduced it a lot to shift their focus back to domestic, because this could be a safety net for the energy security. But of course, they can't rely only on domestic production, and that's why they will continue to do trade and things like that. But they are just going to avoid over-relying on foreign suppliers. And then the second question is about the choice between, or how the priorities between energy security and climate change. To China, if you look at their policy document, actually they play a very balanced way. They just consider both are very, very important. It is not saying that they say energy security is important, self-reliance is important, and they're going to give up climate change. But I think to them it is more about a problem of when they're going to do it. It is a time issue. For climate change, we are talking about to tackle it by kind of to peak the emission by 2030 and then the neutrality by 2060. But if you look at how they address energy security, they are talking about now. Because, I mean, it is a problem of today and a problem of tomorrow. I mean, both are important, but I mean, if you have to address one, you need an order to do it. I think it is just something like this, because something is already in front of your door, but it does not mean that climate change is not important. It is very important to highlight that if any country try to kind of prioritize something over climate change and delay the energy transition, the risk in future will just hit back in a bigger way. So I mean, either way, I mean, it is a survival question, I think. And then the third question is about the cooperation with Russia. Yes, I would say that because of the Ukraine crisis, I mean, it allows China to take the advantage in this trade with Russia. So a lot of Asian countries seems to be enjoying the kind of lower price or discount price when they buy the commodity from Russia. And this have some pros and cons on the I mean, you mentioned South Korea and Japan. I don't think they are joining the other Asian countries, and this means that their share is going to be taken away by the other bigger Asian countries in this market. So let's say maybe in 10 years, if we hope that the Russian problem is solved, they get back to the international community, by that time, how much is left for South Korea and Japan? That could be a question, because the market share is already occupied by the others. But at the same time, if all these Asian countries are really relying on the discounted fossil fuels from Russia, and it could also be a problem because they could be over-relying on fossil fuel for even a longer time, and this could also delay the energy transition. But this is a choice for the, of the policy maker. And then going to Dr. Song's question about China as a renewable leader and how can it be like this? Actually, I think China is relying on its manufacturing capacity or the so-called well factory, because for a lot of renewable stuff, a lot of them rely on basic technology, and as long as you need to produce it, they can import the technology and build all those components. They have the factories, they have the manpower. And more importantly, that they have one of the largest market in the world. This largest market is going to sustain the manufacturing capacity, and this is a very unique model in the world. I don't think India, those countries can really replicate it. And because with all this add up together, it allows China to lead the manufacturing of a lot of clean technologies in the world. But of course, just like Professor Moderator just mentioned, money is also important. All those are private companies or state-owned companies. So to them, the ultimate objective is money. And because every country are trying to accelerate energy transition, they know that there is a high demand for all these equipments or technology. So this is a, expanding market, and there's a lot of commercial incentive here. And I would say all this add up and just become what we are seeing now. I think the last question is something like if most of the countries prefer gradual energy transition or something like that. I would say climate change, there's no doubt it is consensus for all countries, but it is obvious that different countries have their own understanding of pace. Especially in the recent COP, although they point to the same point that yes, we have to phase out coal, but whenever they have to sign on to something to really to set a time or something like that, some countries will just try to push back. And at the moment, I would say the Western country, which means the EU and some developed countries, South Korea, Japan, and the US, they are in Australia, they are more on the front line on this pushing it. But other than it, and the developing countries might not be that willing to speed up their stuff because their economy are quite fragile to all this. It is a good idea, let's say, to think about to expand the renewable market because it could be employment. And this is actually the case for a lot of developed countries. But for developing countries, if you simply just expand the renewable sector, can you really transfer all those fossil fuels workers to the renewable sector? And if you can't, then it could be a social risk for them. So I think there are a lot, it is not saying that it is not important. It is just saying that there's a lot of obstacles that those policymakers has to take into consideration. I hope I answer most of the questions, and I will pass it to
Thank you for answering to all the questions. And let's just give the mic to Dr. Shim just for a minute, okay?
Yeah, sorry for interruption because my time schedule is getting in. So I'm gonna answer Dr. Song's question. First, we have to believe the report of IPCC. Maybe if we don't reach the carbon neutrality by 2050, probably our status could be beyond 1.5 degree, which means that actually the science paper report that Earth, our temperature commuting between glacier period and interglacier period. The temperature difference is below within 10 degree. Yeah, but if we fail to carbon neutrality and the temperature increase, beyond 2 degrees Celsius, then our status gonna be out of the status between glacier and interglacier period. And the climate scenario telling us that the worst scenario, like the BAU scenario, which telling us that the end of this the century, the Korea temperature increase is 6 degrees. 6 degrees, which is 4 times the more than the IPCC the message. So which means that we are reaching the total different planet. So the another issue is that even if we reach the carbon neutrality 2050, which means that we probably control the temperature increase below 2.0, and now we already suffer a lot of heat wave and the water cycle issues, and we are still less than 1.5 degree. So if we want to, hoping the status back to 1990s, probably I believe, even if we reach the carbon neutrality, we have to wait more than 100 years because of the heat capacity of the Earth is huge, and we already changed that much. So that means even if we reach the carbon neutrality, that doesn't mean we are back to the 1990s. We have to wait a couple of hundred, maybe. Yeah, that's my question.
Okay, despite your busy schedule, thank you for joining us. And the last answer would be made by Ms. Se르게예바, and you can have 8 minutes.
I'll try to make it shorter. So talking about carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBM, and the cost for exporters, I should say that this issue, first, it's not only CBAM. As you know, at the end of December 2021, the European Union also proposed the legislation, the directive that would ban long-term contracts for natural gas with unabated emissions. So basically, it means that the contracts that the companies would not be able to procure like traditional natural gas with long-term contracts. So it gives the exporters 2 options. First, you can sell your gas on spot, or you have to cope with emissions. So together with a CBM, it actually gives a significant pressure for the carbon-intensive industries. But the outcome might be different because producers can choose different roads. The most optimistic road, and basically that's what the people, the officials who were developing this legislation were hoping for, is that the producers will decarbonize. How could they do it? There are different measures. They can increasingly rely on renewable energy sources. For example, in Russia, the steel-making company aluminum making company EN+, it relied on hydro energy. More than 98% of its energy was from hydro. And like in this way, they were able to produce green steel. However, as we see now, the LNG producers, for example, that sell carbon neutral LNG, they do not rely on any real technologies. They basically, what they do is that they procure, most of them, they procure carbon offsets from the climate projects realized in developing countries in the world. So in countries like Ghana, Zambia, Indonesia, India. So in countries where, in all honesty, the cost of offsets is not very high. So what we see is that the producers, they kind of comply with the regulation. They do tick the box, but they do not use all the efforts that could be taken to achieve real carbon neutrality. What other measures could be used? It could be also, as I have mentioned, electrification of the production, as the Freeport LNG is going to do. It is carbon capture, utilization and storage that Novatek was aiming to do prior to February 2022. I do not know if these plans are still in place or they have to be changed. Yeah, mainly that's carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies would be. But also there is the other side of the problem that may result actually in which can bring negative outcome to the importers, because at the end of the day, most likely it will be importer who is going to pay for that. And for LNG value chain, we could say that it is, it sounds actually rational, because if we see at the distribution of greenhouse gas emissions along the value chain, we would see that 75%, roughly 75% of all the emissions along the value chain, they take place at the combustion stage. So it should really be the responsibility of the consumer. So I think that what we need to do now is that we just need to stop putting the responsibility on producers or on consumers solely. We really need to work together to accelerate the development of technologies that would really enable this carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for, well, how can I put it? Interesting presentation and nice discussion and your answers. Well, I would like to express my gratitude again to all the participants of today, especially the co-host of Busan University of Foreign Studies, Director Hwang Young-ju, and Korean Environment Institute Director Kang Taek-gu, and all the participants of today, and especially to these energy mafias from Russia, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia, and also from Japan. And if, despite your busy schedules, well, you guys decide to join the conference in person. So I really think about that. And well, we have had this kind of international conference for 3 times. The first time was in 2020, and the second conference was in 2021, and now this is the 3rd time, and I hope that we can hold this international conference again in next year. And if it is possible, I would like to invite you all the guys again, and we can meet it again. And even though it will not be broadcast lively tomorrow, but we can have another session about the energy security and environmental cooperation. So we are talking about energy security, environmental cooperation, carbon neutrality, and all the important things for the survival of the human being. And I hope that we can make a better world through the cooperation among different countries, and especially, well, with all of us. And so, well, I hope that you guys can have a nice flight to your home country, bon voyage. And I have to say goodbye to all the audiences of today. And lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to the 2 nice interpreters of today. Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.